I'm Orla, 28 female. I live in a city that always felt a little too small for my ambitions, but just right for my family, or so I thought. As a senior data analyst, my life is about finding patterns in chaos, a skill that I would soon discover was just as applicable to my personal life as it was to my professional one. This is the story of how I went from being the reliable, endlessly supportive daughter and sister to a ghost in my own family's life, all because they thought their love was something I had to buy. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. In my family, there were two distinct roles, and they were assigned early. My younger sister, Sophie, was the golden child. She was the artist, the free spirit, the one who was destined for creative greatness. My parents, Eleanor and Richard, would watch her sketch in a notebook or talk passionately about a new font she'd discovered with a kind of reverence. She was the dreamer. I, on the other hand, was the pragmatist. I was good at math, organized, and responsible. From a young age, if a bill needed to be understood or a warranty needed to be registered, it was handed to me. While Sophie was praised for her creativity, I was praised for my reliability. It didn't feel like an insult back then, it just felt like the way things were. My father, an accountant, ironically seemed to have a blind spot when it came to our family's finances, specifically where Sophie was concerned. My mother, a retired teacher, believed in nurturing talent above all else. And to her, Sophie's talent was a delicate flower that couldn't be bothered with the harsh realities of life, like rent or car payments. So from the moment I got my first real job after college, I was subtly, and then not so subtly, encouraged to become the family's financial backstop. It started small. Orla, honey, Sophie's laptop died right before her finals. Could you possibly help her out? You're so good with your money. That was the first time. I was 22, barely making ends meet myself, but I dipped into my meager savings and bought her a new one. The gratitude was effusive, but the repayment never materialized. It became a pattern. Sophie's car needed new tires. Sophie's freelance client was late with a payment, and she couldn't make rent. Sophie needed a new tablet for her graphic design work. Each time, my parents would approach me with the same gentle, expectant pressure. They never framed it as a demand, always as a request from one loving sister to another. And because I loved my sister, and because I craved their approval, I always said yes. I became the unofficial Bank of Orla. I set up a separate savings account that was unofficially earmarked for Sophie emergencies. Over the years, that account was drained and refilled more times than I could count. I justified it to myself by saying that I was investing in her future. She was a freelance graphic designer, and the gig economy was tough. I had a stable, well-paying job. It was my duty, as the responsible older sister, to help. The dynamic was solidified. Family dinners were a showcase of Sophie's latest artistic endeavors, her portfolio spread across the dining table, my parents cooing with delight. My achievements, a promotion, a major project success, were met with a polite, "That's nice, dear," before the conversation inevitably shifted back to Sophie. I told myself it didn't bother me. I was the stable one. I didn't need the spotlight. But a small part of me, a part that I pushed down deep, felt less like a pillar of the family and more like its foundation. Essential, but completely buried and unseen. My friend Maya saw it clearly. We'd been friends since college, and she was the only one I was truly honest with about the financial arrangement. "It's not an arrangement, Orla," she told me over coffee one afternoon. "It's exploitation. They've made you the designated adult for your own sister, who is, by the way, an actual adult." I would always defend them. "It's not like that. They're just trying to support her dream." Maya would just shake her head, her expression a mixture of pity and frustration. "Her dream is being funded by your dream. Don't you want to buy a house someday? Travel? Or are you just going to be funding Sophie's brand until you're 50? I'd laugh it off, but her words would echo in my mind for days. The breaking point began to form subtly. Sophie turned 22 and decided she wanted to move into a trendier, more expensive apartment downtown to be closer to the creative scene. My parents thought it was a wonderful idea. The problem was, the rent was nearly double what she had been paying. I knew what was coming. A few days later, my mother called me. "Orla, sweetheart, we need to talk about Sophie." We met for lunch, and over salads, my mother laid out the plan. Sophie had found the perfect place, but she was a little short on the deposit and first month's rent. And the rent itself was a bit of a stretch, but she was expecting some big projects to come through. The request was predictable. Could I co-sign the lease and help her with the initial costs? "It's just a formality, of course," my mother said, smiling sweetly. "Just to give the landlord peace of mind. And if you could just cover her for the first couple of months, until she gets on her feet." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. Co-signing a lease was a massive financial commitment. It meant I was legally responsible for her rent if she failed to pay. "Mom, that's a really big ask. I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that." The smile on her face tightened. "Orla, this is for your sister. It's an incredible opportunity for her to network. We have to support her. You're in such a good position to help. It wouldn't be a burden for you." A burden for me? The words hung in the air. All the thousands of dollars I had given over the years, all the times I'd put my own financial goals on hold, was none of that considered a burden? For the first time, I pushed back, albeit gently. I told her I would think about it. I left that lunch feeling a sense of unease I couldn't shake. It was the first time the gentle expectation had felt like a steel trap, slowly closing around me. I didn't know it then, but this was just the overture. The main performance, the one that would shatter my entire perception of my family, was just around the corner. A week after the tense lunch with my mother, she called again, her voice brimming with a forced cheerfulness that immediately put me on high alert. "Hi, sweetheart. Your father and I are making that pot roast you love on Sunday. We'd love for you and Sophie to come over. A proper family dinner." I was hesitant. The co-signing issue was still hanging between us, unresolved. I had been avoiding her calls, trying to figure out how to say no without causing a family war. But the offer of my favorite meal, the appeal to a proper family dinner, was a classic Aliner move. It was a velvet glove, and I knew there was an iron fist balled up inside it. Against my better judgment, I agreed to go. I told myself it would be a good opportunity to talk things through calmly, as a family. I was so naive. I arrived on Sunday to the warm, familiar smell of roasting meat and garlic. Sophie was already there, lounging on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She greeted me with a breezy "hey" that didn't quite meet her eyes. My father was in his armchair reading the paper, and my mother was bustling in the kitchen. It all felt deceptively normal. For the first hour, we engaged in pleasantries. We talked about my work, though my parents' eyes glazed over when I tried to explain a complex data model. The conversation quickly shifted to Sophie's latest design project for a local coffee shop, which my parents listened to with rapt attention, asking detailed questions. I felt the familiar sting of being sidelined, but I pushed it down. Dinner was served, and it was delicious. My mother really had outdone herself. As we ate, the conversation was light. I started to relax, thinking maybe I had misjudged the situation. Maybe they had dropped the co-signing idea. Maybe they just wanted a nice family meal. Then, as my mother cleared the plates for dessert, my father folded his newspaper deliberately and placed it on the side table. He cleared his throat. "Orla," he began, his tone shifting from paternal warmth to business-like seriousness. "Your mother and I, and Sophie, have been talking, and we've come up with a solution that we think is fair to everyone." My mother returned from the kitchen, but not with dessert. In her hands was a folder. She placed it on the table in front of me with a soft thud. I stared at it. It was a plain, manila folder, but it felt as heavy as a block of cement. "What is this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "It's a proposal," my father said. "Something more formal so you feel secure in your investment in Sophie's future." I opened the folder. Inside were several pages of typed text, neatly formatted. The title at the top read, "Family Contribution and Support Agreement." My blood ran cold. It was a contract, a homemade, legally dubious, but very explicit contract. I read through the clauses, my horror growing with each line. It stated that I, Orla, would agree to provide ongoing financial support to my sister, Sophie, for a period of no less than 5 years, or until she achieved financial self-sufficiency. a term that was left conveniently undefined. The support was itemized. I was to co-sign the lease on her new apartment and cover any rental shortfalls. I was to provide a monthly stipend of $800 for business and living expenses. I was to contribute to a career development fund for her to purchase new equipment and software as needed. In return, the agreement stated that Sophie would provide me with a quarterly report on her business progress, and once her annual income exceeded $100,000, she would begin to repay the support as a no-interest loan. I looked up from the pages, my hands trembling slightly. My parents and Sophie were watching me, their faces a mixture of expectation and resolve. They had planned this. The dinner, the pot roast, the casual conversation, it was all a setup. It was an ambush. "You can't be serious," I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "This is insane. You want me to sign a contract to give my sister my money?" My mother took a deep breath, her teacher voice emerging. "We see it as formalizing the support you've always been happy to provide, dear. This way, everything is clear and on the table. It protects you, too. It shows our commitment to this being a temporary arrangement." Protects me? It indebts me for 5 years, $100,000. Sophie has never earned more than $20,000 in a year. This isn't a safety net, it's a life sentence. My voice was rising, but I didn't care. Sophie, who had been silent until now, finally spoke up, her voice laced with wounded entitlement. "I can't believe you're being so selfish, Orla. This is my career we're talking about. I thought you believed in me. I thought you were my sister." The guilt trip was so blatant, so perfectly executed, it was almost impressive. My father chimed in, his tone firm. "Orla, we are your parents. We have always supported you in your stable, sensible career. Now we are asking you to do the same for your sister. Family helps family. This is non-negotiable." Non-negotiable. The word echoed in the silent dining room. They weren't asking me. They were telling me. They had discussed it, planned it, and presented it as a final verdict. My role in this was not to negotiate or discuss, but simply to sign on the dotted line. They saw my income not as my own, but as a family resource that they had the right to allocate. My entire life, I had worked hard, been responsible, saved my money, and for what? To be handed a bill for my sister's dreams. To be told that my financial future was now tethered to her whims, I looked at their faces. My mother's look of stern disappointment, my father's unyielding authority, my sister's petulant glare. In that moment, something inside me broke. It was the illusion that we were a family of equals, that their love was unconditional. I saw them for what they were, a board of directors, and I was their sole investor, being forced into a hostile takeover of my own life. I slowly pushed the folder back across the table. "No," I said, my voice low but steady. "Absolutely not." The shock on their faces was palpable. The Bank of Orla was officially closed. The silence that followed my refusal was heavier than anything I had ever experienced in that house. It was a thick, suffocating blanket of disbelief and indignation. My mother's face, which had been set in an expression of patient expectation, crumpled into a mask of deep hurt. My father's jaw tightened, a muscle pulsing in his cheek. Sophie just stared at me as if I'd grown a second head. "What do you mean, no?" my father finally asked, his voice dangerously low. "It's a simple word," I replied, finding a strange calm in the eye of the storm I had just created. "No, I will not be signing that. No, I will not co-sign the lease. And no, I will not be giving Sophie another dollar." Sophie let out a gasp of theatrical outrage. "Orla, after everything I'm trying to build, you're just going to abandon me?" "Abandon you?" I almost laughed. The audacity was breathtaking. "Sophie, I have been funding your life for the last 6 years. There's a difference between a helping hand and a permanent handout." My mother stood up, her hands clasped in front of her. "Orla, I think you're being hysterical and ungrateful. We have always provided for you. We gave you a good home, a good education. And I am grateful for that," I cut in, my own voice rising to match hers. "I'm so grateful that I got a good job and have been paying you back by bankrolling my adult sister ever since." The argument devolved from there. It was a whirlwind of accusations and recriminations. I was selfish. I was jealous of Sophie's talent. I didn't understand the pressures of being a creative. I had a cold heart. I was tearing the family apart. Through it all, I held my ground. The contract sat on the table between us, a symbol of their outrageous entitlement. Finally, I'd had enough. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the wooden floor. "I'm done," I said, looking each of them in the eye. "I'm done with this conversation, and I'm done being the family ATM." I grabbed my purse and walked out, ignoring my mother's tearful pleas and my father's angry shouts to come back and be reasonable. The drive home was a blur. My hands were shaking, and my mind was racing. I felt a confusing mix of terror and exhilarating freedom. I had finally stood up for myself, but I knew I had detonated a bomb in the middle of my family. The fallout was just beginning. When I got back to my apartment, I couldn't settle. The injustice of it all was burning a hole in my chest. Ungrateful. Selfish. The words echoed in my head. Had I been wrong? Was I being unfair? For years, I had just given the money without ever really thinking about the total. It was always just a few hundred here, 1,000 there. But my brain, the data analyst part of my brain, kicked into gear. I needed to see the pattern. I needed the numbers. I spent the rest of that night and all of the next day combing through 6 years of my financial history. I opened every banking app, every credit card statement, every archived email. I created a new spreadsheet, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I labeled columns, date, amount, recipient, reason. I went through every transaction I could find that was for Sophie. The new laptop, the car repairs, the rent checks, the art supplies, the emergency loans that were never repaid. The concert tickets because she was networking, the weekend trip because she was creatively blocked. As the spreadsheet grew, so did my nausea. The numbers were staggering. It wasn't a few $1,000s. It wasn't even 10 or 20,000. As I hit the sum function at the bottom of the column, the final number flashed onto the screen, glowing with an almost radioactive intensity. Over the past 6 years, I had given my sister a total of $58,450. I stared at the screen, feeling the air leave my lungs. Over $58,000. It was more than my entire down payment fund that I had been so painstakingly trying to build. It was a luxury car. It was a year of travel around the world. It was a significant chunk of a master's degree. It was a future I had sacrificed without even realizing the true cost. Seeing it all laid out in black and white, in neat columns and rows, was a brutal, clarifying moment. It stripped away all the emotional manipulation, all the justifications of helping family. This wasn't help. This was wholesale subsidization. My parents hadn't just been encouraging me to help my sister, they had been actively managing the transfer of my wealth to her. They had seen my hard-earned income as a solution to the problem of Sophie's financial irresponsibility. I wasn't a daughter, I was a line item in their budget. The contract wasn't a sudden escalation, it was simply the next logical step in their long-term financial plan for me. They wanted to lock in their funding source. The truth in those numbers was a cold, hard slap in the face. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the complete lack of respect. They had never once considered my own dreams, my own financial goals. They saw me as a utility, a resource to be tapped. The anger that had been simmering inside me for years finally boiled over into a cold, clear rage. They thought I was selfish. They had no idea. They had used my love and my sense of duty as weapons against me. They had leveraged my responsible nature to enable Sophie's lack of it. And now they had the audacity to be angry that I was turning off the tap. I saved the spreadsheet, naming the file the real contract. It was all the proof I needed. My family hadn't just betrayed me at a dinner. They had been betraying me, transaction by transaction, for 6 years. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that I could not let it continue for one more day. The question was no longer about how to say no. The question was now how to get out. Armed with the horrifying clarity of my spreadsheet, I felt a shift in my perspective. The hurt and confusion were still there, but they were now overshadowed by a chilling sense of purpose. I had been deceived on a massive scale, and my analytical mind needed to understand the full extent of it. The contract and the $58,450 were the main story, but I started to wonder about the subplots. Where, exactly, had all that money gone? My parents and Sophie had always painted a picture of a struggling artist, barely scraping by. The narrative was one of constant financial crisis, of a creative genius being held back by a cruel world. But did the evidence support the story? I decided to do what I do best. I started digging for data. My first port of call was social media. I rarely paid close attention to Sophie's online presence. I found her constant posts about her brand and her journey to be exhausting. But now, I scrolled through her profiles with the focused intensity of a forensic accountant. I went back months, then years. And as I scrolled, a new picture began to emerge, one that was wildly at odds with the struggling artist narrative. There she was at a trendy brunch spot, the kind where a single mimosa costs $20, with the caption, "Fueling the creative process." There were photos from a weekend music festival, an event I knew cost hundreds of dollars for a ticket alone. I remembered that weekend distinctly. My mother had called me in a panic because Sophie's client had unexpectedly delayed a payment, and she couldn't make her car payment. I had transferred her $400, feeling sorry for her bad luck. Seeing her in the photo, wearing a designer-inspired outfit and smiling without a care in the world, made my stomach turn. I kept digging. I found pictures of her on a spontaneous beach trip with friends, posts showcasing new, expensive art supplies, a video of her unwrapping a brand new drone for aerial photography projects, something she had never mentioned to me. Each post was a small piece of the puzzle. I started cross-referencing the dates of her extravagant posts with my financial records. The pattern was undeniable. A significant number of my emergency fund transfers coincided almost perfectly with her non-essential, luxury purchases and experiences. The week I sent her $1,000 to cover a rental deposit crisis, she posted a photo of a new, high-end leather jacket. The time I covered her unexpected dental bill for $600, she posted a story from a spa day with her friends. It was a systematic and calculated deception. They weren't just taking my money for her needs, they were taking it for her wants. They were using my responsible nature to fund a lifestyle she couldn't afford and wasn't earning. The image of the struggling artist was a carefully crafted lie, a marketing campaign designed for an audience of one, me. The most painful part was realizing my parents had to be in on it. They were the intermediaries. They were the ones who called me with the sob stories, their voices filled with worry and concern. They must have known she wasn't on the brink of financial collapse. They saw her posts. They saw her new clothes and gadgets. They weren't just enabling her, they were her co-conspirators. My friend Maya was horrified when I laid it all out for her. I met her at her real estate office, the spreadsheet open on my laptop, social media profiles pulled up on the monitor. She listened in silence, her expression growing darker with every detail. "Orla, this is beyond anything I imagined," she said, her voice low. "This isn't just entitlement. This is a coordinated, long-term fraud. They've been playing you for years." "I know," I whispered, the words tasting like ash. "And the worst part is I let them. I wanted to believe I was helping." "You did what any loving sister and daughter would do," Maya said fiercely. "You trusted them. They're the ones who broke that trust, not you." Her validation was like a balm on a raw wound. She was right. The fault wasn't mine. Maya, ever the practical one, shifted into problem-solving mode. "So, what's your next move? Because you cannot stay in this situation. You know that, right?" "I know," I said, my resolve hardening. "I need to get out. I need to completely disentangle myself from them financially and physically." We started talking about options. I lived in an apartment downtown, but my parents had a key for emergencies. They knew my routines, my schedule. Any move I made would have to be quiet and fast. "They'll never see it coming," Maya said, a determined glint in her eye. "They think you're just going to cool off and come back, ready to apologize and sign their ridiculous contract. They have no idea who they're dealing with." The investigation had given me the final piece of the puzzle I needed. It wasn't just about refusing to sign a contract anymore. It was about recognizing that the entire foundation of my family relationships was built on a lie. My role, my money, my future, it was all just a means to an end for them. The deception wasn't an isolated incident, it was the system itself. They had unmasked themselves with their greed and their arrogance. They believed I was so conditioned to my role as the Bank of Orla that I would never question them. They had underestimated me. They saw me as a dependable, predictable asset. They were about to learn that the most valuable asset I possessed was my own mind, and I was finally using it to analyze my way to freedom. The anger was still there, but now it was a cold, efficient fuel. I wasn't just going to say no. I was going to disappear. The decision to leave wasn't made in a moment of anger. It was a calculated conclusion drawn from the data I had gathered. My family operated on a system of control and manipulation, and my presence and proximity were essential for that system to function. To truly be free, I couldn't just build a wall. I had to move to a different continent, metaphorically speaking. I needed to become a ghost. I confided my plan to Maya, who immediately dubbed it Operation Ghost. Her expertise as a real estate agent and her unwavering loyalty made her the perfect and only person I could trust. The first step was finding a new place to live. I gave Maya my criteria: a secure building in a neighborhood my family would never think to look for me in, with a lease available immediately. Within 48 hours, she had a list. We viewed 3 apartments one afternoon while I was supposedly at a work conference. The third one was perfect. It was a 1-bedroom in a modern high-rise about a 45-minute drive from my old place, on the opposite side of the city. It had a concierge, secure underground parking, and a view that wasn't of my past. I signed the lease the next day, paying the deposit and first month's rent from my down payment fund. It felt like the first truly selfish and liberating thing I had done with my own money in years. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in clandestine logistics. My parents and Sophie were trying to re-establish contact. Their initial angry voicemails had softened into messages of concern. My mother called, crying, saying she just wanted to talk things through. My father sent terse texts. "This silence is childish, Orla. Call your mother." Sophie sent a string of messages that veered wildly from accusations. "You're ruining my life over a piece of paper," to pleading, "I really need your help with my rent, big sis. Please." I ignored them all. I put their numbers on silent and archived their messages without reading them. Every ping of my phone was a reminder of why I was doing this. My plan was to move on a Friday. I had taken the day off work, citing a doctor's appointment. The key was to move my entire life in one day without a single person in my family knowing. I started by methodically packing my things in secret. At night, after work, I'd put on some music and pack boxes, labeling them with codes instead of room names. I sold larger pieces of furniture online, arranging for buyers to pick them up at specific times when I knew I'd be home. I told them I was redecorating. To anyone watching, my life was proceeding as normal. I also began the process of building a financial firewall. I went to a different branch of my bank and opened all new accounts. I set up a new checking account, new savings accounts, and applied for a new credit card. I meticulously went through my finances, redirecting my direct deposit from work to the new account and moving my savings over in smaller, less conspicuous increments. I canceled the joint credit card I shared with my mother for emergencies, an emergency that had in the past 6 years only ever been hers or Sophie's. This was the most concrete step, the digital equivalent of changing the locks. The Bank of Orla was being liquidated. The day before the move, I contacted my utility providers and the post office. I scheduled a service disconnection for my old apartment and a service connection for the new one. I filled out a change of address form, but not to my new apartment. I rented a P.O. box in a town 30 minutes away. Any stray mail would go there, not to my new home, ensuring my physical address remained completely private. On the morning of the move, Maya arrived at my apartment at 8 a.m. sharp with a coffee and a look of steely determination. The moving truck I'd hired, a generic, unbranded vehicle to avoid suspicion, arrived shortly after. The movers were efficient and professional. We worked for 6 hours straight, a whirlwind of boxes, tape, and quiet efficiency. By 2 p.m., the apartment was empty. It was eerie, seeing the space I had lived in for 5 years stripped bare. The ghosts of my past life seemed to linger in the faint outlines on the walls where pictures used to hang. I did one final walkthrough. I took the spare key my parents had from its hook by the door and put it in my pocket. I wrote a check for the final month's rent and a brief, professional notice for my landlord, which I would drop in his mail slot on my way out. I was leaving nothing behind. As we stood in the empty living room, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my mother. "Orla, we are really worried. Please just let us know you are safe." The manipulation was so ingrained, so automatic. For a moment, a pang of guilt hit me. But then I looked around the empty apartment, a symbol of the life I was reclaiming, and the guilt vanished, replaced by resolve. Maya put a hand on my shoulder. "You ready?" I took a deep breath. "I'm ready." I closed the door to my old apartment for the last time, not with a bang, but with a quiet, decisive click. Operation Ghost was complete. I was a ghost in my own city, free from the haunts of my family's expectations. The silence I was leaving behind was my answer. Now, all I had to do was wait for them to hear it. The first few days in my new apartment were surreal. The silence was the most profound change. There were no guilt-inducing voicemails, no passive-aggressive texts, no sudden emergency calls that sent my stomach into knots. The only sounds were the distant hum of the city and the quiet rhythm of my own life, a life I was now conducting on my own terms. I spent the weekend unpacking, turning the empty shell of an apartment into a home that was solely mine. Every picture I hung, every book I placed on a shelf, was an act of reclaiming my identity. I was not just Orla, the responsible sister. I was just Orla. On Monday, I went back to work. I had informed my HR department of my change of address for payroll purposes, but stressed the need for confidentiality. Life fell into a new, peaceful routine, but I knew the peace was temporary. It was the calm before the storm. The silence I had created would eventually be noticed, and it would be loud. The first sign came on Wednesday. I received a notification from my old bank account, the one I had left open with a minimal balance to catch any stray auto drafts, that a payment had been declined. It was an automated subscription service registered in Sophie's name that I had forgotten I was paying for. It was only $14.99, but it was a loose thread. Pulling it would begin to unravel my disappearance. The real explosion happened on Friday, exactly 1 week after my move. My phone, which had been blissfully quiet, suddenly lit up with a barrage of calls and texts. They were from my parents. I didn't answer. Then came the emails, each subject line more frantic than the last. "Answer your phone. Urgent family emergency. Orla, where are you?" Then an email from Sophie. "My rent check bounced. The landlord is calling me. What did you do?" Apparently, she had tried to pay her rent using an old check from a joint account I had closed months ago, but had forgotten to take her name off of immediately. It was a foolish oversight on her part, assuming the funds would always be there. Then came the call from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. The message was from my old landlord. "Hi, Orla, this is Tom from your old apartment on Maple Street. I got your check and your notice, thank you. I also got a call from your mother. She sounded very distressed. She said she came by to check on you and saw the apartment was empty. She was asking me for your forwarding address, which of course I couldn't give her. Just wanted to let you know. Hope everything is okay." So they knew. My mother had used her key, a key she was never supposed to use without my permission, and had found my empty apartment. The ghost was out of the bag. The ensuing deluge was biblical. My parents and Sophie tried every conceivable method to contact me. They called my work, but my company's receptionist, under strict instructions, simply stated that I was unavailable and took a message. They messaged my friends on social media. Maya called me to report that my mother had sent her a long, rambling message accusing her of being a bad influence and demanding to know where I was. Maya had simply blocked her. The desperation escalated. My father left a long, rambling voicemail that swung from rage to pleading. He accused me of being cruel and vindictive, of punishing them for loving me. He ended the message by saying my mother was sick with worry and that if anything happened to her, it would be on my conscience. It was the emotional blackmail grand finale. I listened to that message with a strange detachment. A few weeks ago, it would have shattered me. It would have sent me crawling back, full of apologies and ready to write a check. But now, all I heard was the sound of a broken system. The machine had run out of fuel, my money, my time, my energy, and it was grinding to a halt. They weren't worried about my well-being. They were panicked about their loss of control and their loss of income. Sophie's bounced rent check was the first real consequence they had faced, and they were in complete meltdown. A week later, I received a certified letter at my P.O. box. It was from a law office. My heart hammered in my chest as I opened it, but it wasn't a lawsuit. It was a formal, yet deeply personal, letter from my parents, clearly drafted with a lawyer's guidance. It was a masterpiece of manipulative prose. It spoke of their deep and abiding love and their profound confusion at my actions. It acknowledged that the agreement they had proposed might have been misguided, but was born from a place of desperate love for both our daughters. It ended with a plea for a meeting, for mediation, to heal the family before it's too late. They were trying a new tactic. The anger hadn't worked, the guilt hadn't worked, so now they were trying the appearance of reason. But it was too late. I had seen behind the curtain. There was no going back. I wrote a simple, one-line response and sent it back via my own legal counsel, which Liam, my friend from college, had helped me secure. The response was polite, professional, and absolute. It read, "I have received your letter. At this time, I do not wish to have any contact." I had Maya drop it in the mail. The message was clear. The sound of my silence was my final word. They had spent years ignoring my need. And taking my voice for granted. They had assumed I would always be there, quietly funding their lives in the background. Now, the background was all they had left of me. They had wanted me to sign a contract to be part of their lives. Instead, my absence had become the only contract I was willing to honor, a binding agreement with myself to never again be an asset in someone else's portfolio. Months passed. The initial storm of frantic calls and manipulative messages eventually subsided into a tense, echoing silence. It seemed they had finally understood that my wall was impenetrable. Life settled into a rhythm that was mine alone. I excelled at work, unburdened by the constant low-grade stress of my family's manufactured crises. I started contributing aggressively to my retirement fund and my house down payment fund, the real one this time. For the first time in my adult life, my financial future felt secure, and more importantly, it felt like my own. I built a new kind of family. My friendship with Maya deepened into a sisterhood stronger than the one I'd been born into. I reconnected with old college friends and made new ones at work. These relationships were built on mutual respect and support, not on obligation or financial dependence. It was a revelation to realize that love and connection could exist without a price tag. I learned to cook, took up hiking, and even started planning a solo trip to Italy, something I had always dreamed of but never thought I could afford, not because of the cost of the trip itself, but because of the cost of being the Bank of Orla. About 6 months after I disappeared, I received an email from an unknown address. The subject line was simply Orla. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. It was from Sophie. The tone was completely different from any of her previous messages. There was no anger, no entitlement, no pleading. It was subdued, almost formal. She wrote that her landlord had eventually evicted her after she missed a second month's rent. She had been forced to move back in with our parents. She had to sell her car and most of her expensive equipment to pay off her debts. She had gotten a job, a real, full-time job, as a junior graphic designer at a small marketing firm. It wasn't glamorous, she wrote, but it was a start. "I guess I just wanted to say," the email concluded, "that I get it now. I never understood what you were doing for me until I had to do it for myself. I'm sorry." I read the email several times. A part of me, the old, conditioned part, felt a surge of pity and a desire to reach out to help. But the new, stronger part of me knew better. This was her journey, not mine. Her apology might have been sincere, but trust, once shattered so completely, could not be pieced back together with a simple email. I thought about replying for a long time. In the end, I decided the most powerful response was the one I had been giving all along: silence. Her apology was for her, to unburden her own conscience. My silence was for me, to protect my peace. I archived the email without a reply. The true test came a year after I had left. An email arrived from my father. The subject, "Your mother." My heart clenched. He wrote that my mother, Alina, had been diagnosed with a serious illness and was scheduled for major surgery. He didn't ask for money. He didn't demand I come home. He just stated the facts and ended the email with, "I thought you should know." This was different. It wasn't a manufactured crisis. It was real. I spent a sleepless night wrestling with myself. The daughter in me screamed that I should go to her, that family is family, especially in sickness. But the woman who had fought so hard for her freedom knew it was a potential trap. The next morning, I did something that felt like a compromise between the old Orla and the new. I did not call. I did not email back. I went online to the hospital's official gift shop and sent a large, anonymous bouquet of flowers to my mother's room to be delivered on the day of her surgery. The card simply read, "Wishing you a peaceful recovery." It was an acknowledgement, not a surrender. It was a gesture of compassion from a distance, a way of showing that my heart wasn't made of stone, but my boundaries were. My mother's surgery was successful, and she recovered. I learned this not from my family, but from a distant cousin who I occasionally kept in touch with. I never heard from my father again after that email. I think he finally understood the new terms of our relationship, a relationship defined by an uncrossable distance. It's been 2 years now. I am in the final stages of closing on my own condo. My trip to Italy is booked for this fall. My life is full, peaceful, and entirely my own creation. I don't know if I will ever speak to my parents or my sister again. The damage they did was too deep, the deception too profound. I've learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yours, LF, is to walk away from the people who claim to love you but only value your utility. I drew a new boundary, not just around my finances, but around my life. The contract they tried to force on me was a prison. The silence I gave them in return was my declaration of independence. And in that silence, I finally found the one thing they could never give me and I could never buy: my own self-worth.